All right. Well, welcome again, everyone, to the winter workshop, first workshop. This one is a little different than how the future workshops will be, just because I'm not a student. I'm a former student and I'm current staff. But I do this workshop every year, and I figured while we're kind of in these unprecedented, unquote, times, COVID times, that we do something that's very, very doable. So again, this workshop will kind of, what I don't want is for it to feel like a lecture. I want this to feel as like auditory as possible, but I'm going to run through a pretty lengthy slide deck, and I will explain every step along the way why. So, but I want this to feel interactive, and we're going to switch off between the slide deck, Logic Pro, and Spotify the whole way through. So does that sound good for everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Let's get the show on the road. All right. Everyone can see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. And then y'all aren't seeing my face and like everything on the side here, are you?
Nope.
You say you aren't? Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna optimize the screen. And
Oh, we're seeing a bit of like cross-hatched. Yeah, that fixed it. Cool.
Okay, cool. And then actually, I'm sorry, I'm gonna unshare and then see if it's actually getting my entire screen, because I don't think that was happening. Okay, so you all can see me switching off between Logic Pro and Spotify and everything, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Let me move this over. All right, great, cool. So, thanks everyone for joining. Mixing and Mastering 101, first winter workshop, winter 2022. Let's get into it. So why show the slide deck? Why start with mixing and mastering and not make this like a production workshop or like a synthesizer workshop or everything? It is because this language, the language around sound engineering, mixing and mastering, is, in my experience, as someone who wears a lot of different musical hats, producer, performer, I've done exec producing, like I've probably worn every hat you can wear in music, piano player, composer. This language has gotten me closer to the sound than any other practice. Sound design is probably second up, but all of the fundamentals, everything, like this is an incredibly interdisciplinary language, and I want folks to have it. I want it to excite y'all. I want to equip y'all with it. And I want you to feel empowered, because if you can walk into any room in music with this language, then you can turn the heads of artists, producers, A&R reps, like all kinds of people from all kinds of walks in the industry. And it's just really, really good to know, even 101, a 101 level workshop. So this slide deck will also be about sound and vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary, and if this is your first time, dealing with mixing and mastering, then one route that you could take is to just jump straight into Logic Pro or Pro Tools, or get on an analog mixing desk and kind of just like crawl your way through the vocabulary until you have it mastered. Or you could do a workshop where someone tries to lay it out for you in an incredibly organized way, and then you have buckets that you can fill with all of the water that exists in this field. So also just want connecting all parts of all disciplines, and then connecting all senses in all parts of human existence: mind, ear, and soul, mind, body, soul. So we want all three of those things to be working while we're doing this workshop. Also, there's no textbook for this. There's a lot of you could go online, find a lot, of articles and opinion pieces, but there really is no definitive book, or at least there hasn't been for a really, really long time. So, so this is an attempt to do this in kind of pedagogy. And then at the end of this, I'll do for y'all as I've done in years past, where I'll introduce some 202 concepts, share you on some goodies, some good resources, and all of this sense. Okay, let's have some fun. Also, before we start, again, in the spirit of keeping this as interactive as possible, please feel free to just say like, hey, Tyler, this is so-and-so, this is, this is Chance, this is Sam. Just say like, hey, I didn't catch that piece, or hey, I'm curious about this. Do you mind if we actually kind of play with that idea and logic for a second before moving on to some more words. So again, I can't see anyone, so you gotta like let me know. You gotta just be like, hey, Ty, stop. Let's make some sound and not just some words. Okay. So on the screen right now is literally word salad. You probably see some terms that you have seen before and maybe some that you haven't. Again, this is a one-on-one. We are going to try to organize this best we can and make sense of all of this. So all of this, none of this is intimidating. No matter what level you're at. You might also be an intermediate level mixing, mastering person. You might have some chops on this already, but again, I'm hoping that this organization can just help. So let's start with the one-on-one. Let's get the fundamentals good, and then let's make some sound. But before we do, let's listen to some sound. For all my folks who have headphones or a sound system, can you hear that?
Yep.
I'm gonna put this in double time. And as this goes up, can someone say for me what I'm doing with the cursor?
Making it a little quieter.
Mm-hmm. Anyone got any thoughts of why that is? Why we need to do this? Anyone?
Is it because otherwise it hurts?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Keep a hold of this number. When can you not hear it anymore?
Around like 13,500 hertz.
Okay, I got 13K. Is that Sam?
Yeah, that's Sam.
Okay. Other people, when could you not hear it anymore?
Around 14,005 for me.
Okay. Other
Yeah,
folks?
same. About 14,005.
About
Okay.
14.
Got it.
I think
All
I
right.
had it at 18, but maybe I'm tweaking.
Oh, are you an alien? Oh my gosh.
I might
what?
be.
All right. So not to scare anyone, but at all, don't worry about not being able to hear higher than 14, 15K. The average person by the time they're in college can no longer hear above that frequency. So really only babies can hear, or dogs. So it's incredibly natural, and you can still enjoy music nonetheless. But Sam, no, you hit the nail right on the head, because it starts to hurt after a certain while. So just to say right off the bat, that's one good reason to be good at mixing, to have a sensitivity to people's ears, because all of our ears respond to, the human ear responds differently to different frequencies at different volumes. We'll find certain frequencies more intense than others, but then also every human being's hearing is different. Because we all have different shape sizes and different biologies to our ear. So all of that to say, sound, if you think about cycles per second, we just went through 20 cycles per second to 20,000 cycles per second. And that was the sound of a sine wave, just like a, kind of that type of sound. Sound itself goes up infinitely. Waveforms can be infinitely fast. And all that said, you have creatures that can hear at different or produce sounds at different frequencies. Bats can produce it at greater than 100K, up to, or 100 to 100 kilohertz. And then color, the field of visible light is from 400 to 700K, right? The human range of hearing is 20 to 20K. So whoop-de-doo. But all of that said, we can hear music, we can hear tons of music within that range. And so while it seems limited, it's also beautiful. So also, again, sound sources may contain frequency information that goes beyond the range of human hearing. So say we have a sine wave, and I'm going to switch off to logic for a second. You know, let's say 440. Everyone can hear that? Folks can hear that, right?
I don't hear it.
I
No.
I don't
don't.
hear it.
You don't hear it? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, so I've got to switch the audio. It says I'm sharing my computer sound. It's not coming through. Ah. Okay, folks, can you hear that now?
Yep.
Yes?
Yeah.
All right, sweet. Okay, so say we have that sound. It's a sine wave, just like we just did, right? You know, that we just saw in that video. All right, let's start here. So I don't know, for my people at perfect pitch, I don't know if that's 220 or 440 cycles per second. But say then we do 1 octave up from that. So now let's put them together. So that's a chord, but it's also just a sound in and of itself. If no one told you that that was the combination of this sound and that sound together, it would just sound like that. It would just sound like a thicker sine wave or a thicker version of that fundamental 220 cycles per second. Okay, all good and well. Now, what if we did even more on top of that? So say we, you know, we were recording and then, you know, I took this, dragged in, made it equally long on both sides, blah, blah, blah. And then just cycled that. And then we went even higher. I'm going to turn this down now. All right, now no one told you that that was a chord. You know, it would just sound like one sound, a kind of ringy sound. So that's all this information right here, right? We just added the frequency, another frequency up, an octave up, octave up, octave up, and added all of those together to make one sound. And this is what's happening to the waveform. When you combine them, they start to change the shape of the form because waves interact with each other. And sometimes amplitudes add, other times they cancel each other out and they change that waveform. And you add more, at least in this case, it starts kind of even looking like a staircase almost, or it looks like it's not smooth anymore, starting to look like a more triangular type of shape, or a sawtooth when you add enough of those frequencies together. And if you look, this is a whole bunch of frequency information that is extending beyond the range of human hearing. That's their 20K. There's just all of that to say that frequencies, you know, and you know, like this is right here, this is a sawtooth wave that it's this is 1 cycle per second, which at 440, you know, like is going to be like a nanosecond or something. So we squish all of that together and you get something that starts to then look like, well, a waveform, just like hitting this hi-hat right here. So again, all of that to say, this wave adds a ton of waves together to have a lot of frequency information in it, from 0 hertz all the way out to infinity. Just like this sound combines a lot of waveforms together, you know, and all of these, you know, adding and subtracting waves to then produce this thing that we hear as sound. So it's all about the waves, man. It's literally just waves, adding waves. So we just did some examples. We'll skip this slide. So if this is a waveform, just like that sawtooth wave and the hi-hat was a waveform, if this is, say, a piece of music, and we add a bunch of waves together to make it, then how's that any different than like an ocean, which is also the addition of a ton of waves, or air, which is just the addition of a ton of waves. So all of this is kind of one big preamble. We take this ocean of water, this ocean of waves, and then we put a microphone next to it, record it, or through some synthetic means, some synthesizer, we add those waves together, we get a waveform. We get a signal that we've recorded or that we've generated. So what's the takeaway here? Waveforms and waves, think of them the same thing as signals. Well, in their case, what we're recording when we have waves, what we record when we generate those waves, we get signals. So sound engineering is basically just signal engineering. It's basically just wave engineering or signal processing. That might be another term that you've heard. What's the common denominator here? The word signals. So if you see these other kinds of words, digital signal processing, DSP, signal path, inputs and outputs, signal routing, signal interference, it's all the same common denominator. We're dealing with signals when we mix and when we master. So then let's get into it. Signal processing, AKA sound engineering, AKA mixing and mastering. So this is everything we're going to cover. We're going to cover some definitions of what mixing is, 3 dimensions of mixing. That's my organization. That's the way I organize it. Not everyone is the same, but I just want to give you all these tools. You all can have my organization of mixing and mastering for free. And then down the line, when you're Grammy award winning, or like you're working with Beyonce, or you're working with with glass animals or whatever, like just say your 3 dimensions suck, and I've come up with my own system, and I will gladly welcome any insights that you have, because we're all a community. We're trying to help each other out. So then, if we talk about the 3 dimensions, we're also going to talk about tools, and then we're going to talk about preparing your mix for mastering. And then we'll go into, for mastering, we'll go into definitions, the process of mastering, and tools. So this is a lot of word salad. Things that pretty much, how much of all of this are we going to talk about? We're pretty much going to talk about tools the most, and then 3 dimensions second of all, and then we'll talk a little bit about all of these other topics. Okay, we all good? We're good to keep going. Everyone was good with that example. I didn't go over anyone's head or insult anyone's intelligence.
Yeah, I think Omar had a question about whether or not this would be available for re-referencing. Also, this is Sam.
Yes. This will be, this video is being recorded, and then we'll add it to the Roble Arts Gym website so you can view it later. But then I'll also share you all on these slides since you registered to attend the workshop. And you're helping make this video happen. All right, cool. Any other questions? All good? Good. I'm sorry, y'all. I really can't do it with folks being silent.
I think we're good.
We're good
feedback.
to go.
Okay.
Good to go.
We're
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. All right. So mixing. Let's go into some definitions. You might hear people talk about a mix like this. That mix has balance. That mix has dimension. Every sound pops and has its own place. That mix is clean. So you might remember this album or this album. Kendrick Lamar released this Grammy Award-winning album, To Pimp a Butterfly, back in like 2015. But then afterward, he released songs that were originally going to be on this project, but that weren't mastered, called it Untitled Unmastered. And this is literally what he meant. I mean, he meant also probably figuratively, like, mastered. The album's about slavery, slave and master. Like, it was metaphorical for sure. Like, but also he literally meant that the album was just a collection of mixes and not masters. It's another way we can look at this. So here's Based God, Lil B, the god of the Bay Area. I mean not to disrespect him, because I don't want the based curse like Kevin Durant had for several years. But also what Lil B has here with the Blue Flame mixtape is a tape of mixes. So that's literally what mixtape means. It means you're not worrying about the mastering process. You just want to get the music out there no matter the mix. So if you listen to that, just a hair of that, here's his I Love Video Games.
Video games.
All right, we'll stop there. Can anyone tell me how they felt about that mix? Were the drums popping? How was the voice? Did that feel balanced? How did it feel?
I kind of sounded awful for the first 20 seconds. I'm not gonna. Hey, but then it started going hard, and I was like, oh, I kind of like this, even though like the coin sound was so like weirdly crunchy. Like,
sure. Any other reactions to the bass guy?
I think that's why I kind of felt like the sounds were coming from different places, and it was like weird. It didn't seem like a single piece. It felt like separated somehow.
Other thoughts? This is all great, y'all. Okay. All right. Let's listen to an example. And again, this is apples and oranges. This is Lil B doing a mixtape, and then this is Muramasa and Now doing a mastered track. Mind you, also a few years down the line, and we don't know what kinds of resources they have. We don't know what labels they're signed to. We don't know what engineers they're working with to get this kind of result. But here's the result. Okay, we'll take that one down. That's the longest clip that I'll play in long form, by the way. All right, reactions to that one. In comparison to the Lil B, but also just on its own. What do we think about that one?
It definitely sounded like there was more space for all of the different instruments that were incorporated into the tracks. I feel like you could hear the low ends when they needed to come in. They had space to breathe. In the beginning, I guess it was like a snap that was definitely taking up more space. But then when the lead vocals came in, you heard that back off. So it sounded like there was more intention and it was more balanced than the first track we listened to.
Dang, that's the best report card I've heard on the song. And how are other folks feeling?
I liked it. I really, really liked it. It felt like someone had prepared like the plate, if that makes any sense. Like compared to Lil B, it felt like someone had very meticulously like cleaned up all the edges and like made sure that every single sound was like audible. And that was really like comforting in a way compared to like the crunchiness of the first one, even though like they're both really I like both of them. But
all right, y'all, that just even y'all's two responses, that was great. Hold on to all of the language that you just used. I mean, in some senses, you don't even need to do the rest of this workshop, but let's go deeper into everything that y'all said, because you are 100% on it. Like 100%, that is the goal of what all of this is. So we can do, and also just to say, the way that y'all just heard all of those things just with your ears, I also just want you to I hope that you take ownership and pride in just how well you can already hear things, like how well you're already you're mixing what you want to hear in your mixes and your masters It's just the matter of skill getting there. But you already can hear how songs are supposed to sound. So just the power of the ear and the power of your ear, the power of your taste. All right, let's keep going. Okay, the 3 dimensions. So congratulations, y'all. That's the end of the workshop. Here they go. Three dimensions: dynamics, EQ, and space. Now, I hope that y'all will join me for the rest of this workshop because we're going to, again, go deeper into all of these things, but that's it. If you write anything down, and again, you'll have references to these slides later, but if you write down anything, it's these 3 things. It's dynamics, EQ, and space. Okay, what do we mean? Let's start with dynamics. All right, so again, none of these are trick questions. We just saw something like this earlier when we were working with those sine waves. So for my math nerds, in the X dimension, in the horizontal dimension, what do you think we've got here? What do you think we're looking at? How will we measure the information that we're seeing along the X axis there?
Time.
Close. Frequency. Yeah. Okay. Now in the vertical dimension, what would you say?
Amplitude.
Yes. Perfect. All right. Now, who answered the first time? Who was that? Sorry, the last example. No.
Oh.
Who said time in the last example?
Me.
Okay. So so me. How will we measure? What will we say for this dimension? Do you think?
That's time.
That's time. And then in this dimension, what do we have?
Amplitude.
Amplitude. Perfect. Okay. So when you're listening to something and you react, those drums are so loud. Every time that sound comes in, I feel like my head is going to split open. Why did Chance the Rapper just start yelling out of nowhere? What do you typically want to do? You want to take that track and you want to turn it down. Okay. Conversely, now if, I forget the comedian's name off the top of my head, but if Rihanna is telling him that he needs to speak up because he sounds buried behind everything, or what did he just say? What was that lyric? Or, like for the I Love Video Games, when the drums came in, it was just like, that wasn't even a drop. That was the weakest drop I've ever heard. Typically what you want to do is turn that track up. So what are dynamics? Dynamics are literally balancing volume and loudness between the softest and the loudest sounds. Common terms that you'll hear in dynamics are decibels. That's how you measure, and there's a number of metrics, both analog and digital. So you might see dBV, dBFS, dB. All of those things are still decibels. That's a unit that's, I think, based on a ratio. All my physics people can correct me on this, but it's based on a ratio to kind of measure loudness. And it's just one of them. Dynamic range is a super important term. The difference, the range between the softest and the loudest sounds. So we'll talk about that for tracks that we're mixing. We'll talk about that for an entire song that we're mixing. Does this sound have dynamic range or doesn't it? Do the sounds poke out? And can we hear them when they poke out, or does it just sound flat and lifeless? Or does it sound even and steady? It sounds like it has enough dynamic range, too much, too little. So important term. Peaks, gain staging, this term will come up a lot. And then what tools do we use? The most important one is this, your fader. There's your volume slider right there. Then you've got gain, which adds amplitude. If this fader goes from full 0 decibel loudness before you start to getting this thing called clipping or going over, then when it goes all the way down, it goes to negative infinity, it mutes, it goes to silence. Gain just adds decibels. It might give you 40 plus decibels, negative 40 decibels. So it's just adding decibels, but it's not going from 0 to infinity or 100% to 0%. So faders, gain, very different, but they both are there to accomplish the same thing. And then you might have seen any of these tools: compressors, limiters, transient shapers, saturation, clippers, clipping. So this is all the language of dynamics. Okay, that's it for dynamics. Write this number down. Negative 18 decibels. Why is it magic? Because if you start a mix, say you have like 70 tracks in your mix, but everything is negative 18 decibels, then more than likely when it adds up, it won't cross over the 0 decibel ceiling, where you start getting into clipping. So negative 18 decibels, write that number down. And it's important because, again, gain staging. We need to keep the stage of the individual tracks at one level, so then we can manage the gain of the entire sum of everything. That's another gain level. And then when we hand it off to a mastering engineer, they will do things with the gain. So at every stage, we are managing gain. So important terms. Okay, that's dynamics. Before I go to EQ, we good?
Wait, so real quick. So when you
Yes.
open up a new project and you put in a new
Yes.
track, any track, you're just gonna go ahead and drop that down to -18.
Boom. Exactly.
So and now every time anything comes in, it's just set.
Yeah, it's just set. And we have, there'll be another term that comes in later called headroom. But that is, well, you know, it gives us enough headroom to play with so that not one individual track, like a snap or a clap or a coin, a video game coin sounds like it's crunchy because it's clipping. So yeah, so it's just negative 18. It doesn't have to be negative 18. In some cases, it might even be less, but that's just a magic number. That's a good reference level. You'll hear that throughout the industry that that things should be set to negative 18.
Why does hitting 0 cause it to become crunchy again?
You said what things cause it to become crunchy?
Mhm.
Okay, that's a 202 topic about nonlinear distortion. But it actually happens across all systems, not just sound. Like with any system that is processing signal, if the system can't handle after a certain level, then it has to reject information and keep it packed into the signal so it can process it. We hear that as distortion. So it distorts the signal, pushes the excess information down, and warps it out of shape so that it can contain that information still. So it's really the system trying to protect itself. And digital systems have certain ways that they do that. Analog systems have different ways that they do that. Does that make sense?
Okay, so that's what's causing the crunchiness when it goes past 0.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Or if we're using a tool that intentionally does that, like a saturator or a clipper, then we'll set the threshold lower. We might even set the threshold to negative 18 decibels early on so that it clips early and that we're playing with a distorted signal earlier, but we might be doing that for aesthetic effect. Does that make sense?
Sorta.
Okay. We'll get into it later. We'll get into some of these things later, but yeah, it's basically when a system can't handle the level over a certain threshold of volume.
Okay.
That's what causes it to clip. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So with negative 18 decibels, I feel like it might be hard to actually hear your tracks as they're going. Is it okay to like put your actual volume up louder while it's at negative 18 so you can hear it?
You can, so what you can do in that case, you can take all of the levels of all of your individual tracks, set them to negative 18 dB, but then take your master fader, your master level, and raise that up so that you have a better working level, a playback level to listen to it. Or you can take your headphone volume and turn that up. So
gotcha.
Yeah. So again, the benefits of gain staging. This is something that they do not teach producers and composers early enough. And then sometimes they send it to a mixing engineer and they're like, what happened? Like, why is my track falling apart? So I just want to give you all this early. So, okay. Are folks cool if we move on to EQ?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So those two letters, what do they mean? Well, let's start with an intuitive example. So you can say what, you know, every art is subjective, but what arguments could folks make for why the right image may look a little better than the left? We're not going to go with the opposite of why the left might look better than the right. Let's just start with the right one.
It's more vibrant.
Okay, vibrant.
And it has more saturation, like the colors.
More color. Can anyone kind of point out what this area of the painting, this area of the painting, and this area of the painting have in common? They're all kind of yellowish, oranges, right?
Yeah, warmer
Like
tones.
Warmer tones and consistently, right? Throughout the image. Like you can, this one has consistent green throughout, but this one, you know, from the facial, the way that's the face is kind of being warmed up, this grass, this foliage here, and then and it all seems to be, centering around the warmth of this central subject here that's popping out, this pumpkin. So almost like the rest of the image is taking a cue from this pumpkin here, right?
Yeah.
So why can't we do the same with music? So you take information in the lows, when it sounds really, when it sounds like it's in that sweet spot, it, like that orange, feels warm. When it's too much of it, it might sound rumbly or boomy or muddy. When it's not enough of it, it might sound thin, like there's no energy. It might sound like an intercom. Then you take those middle frequencies, at the sweet spot, they feel full. But if it's too much, then it kind of starts to sound like it's nasal, like a person kind of talking like this, or it sounds boxy, or it sounds roomy, or it sounds hollow. It sounds like it has no body. It sounds like it's buried in the mix, like you can't even make out what they're saying. Mind you, also, our speaking volumes, the average human speaking volume, regardless of hormones, regardless of gender, regardless of genetics, most of them exist within that middle set of frequencies. So fullness is important. And then lastly, you take the high information, at its best, it sounds shimmery. The term that a lot of folks talk about on these audio forums, these mixing mastering forums, is that there's a sheen. There's a SHEEN, a sheen that exists on the track, on top of the track. But when it's too much of it, like, that's kind of the nails on a chalkboard thing. It's glassy, it's piercing, it's harsh. And when there's not enough of it, it sounds dull. It sounds like there's no clarity. It might even sound like it's submerged underwater. So we want warm, we want fullness, we want shimmer. So that is EQ. It is equalizing, finding balance across frequency information across different bands. And your tools might look like this on the left. Common terms you might hear: hertz, which hertz is literally just cycles per second. 20 hertz means that we're getting 20 complete cycles, which is basically inaudible to the human ear, but we're getting all of that in a second. It's still a lot per second. But then you get into the 100, you get like you start to get those lower tones, and even though they're still low, it's still cycling through a lot of frequencies per second. And this can be sine waves, square waves, complex waves, simple waves. Waves is how many times does that wave cycle per second. You might hear terms like filtering, resonance, Q factor, which means quality factor. It's another thing that shows up in physics. It comes from physics. I can't get into the specifics why it's like a 303, 404 topic, but boost and attenuate, add volume, lower volume. Like here, this is attenuation, this is boosting. Or you might get your different kinds of filters, your low cut, high cut filters, which are basically high pass and low pass filters. You got shelves and you got notches or bells. And then what tools are used? It's called an EQ. So that's EQ. Before we move on to space, are we all good on EQ? Did all of that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. For the person who said kinda, just let me know if it comes back to mind later. Hopefully, some things clear up when we get into tools. Okay. Space. All right. I chose this image, or the image chose me. I didn't choose the image. But when you're a cat standing between that, say, two dogs, it might feel like you're being surrounded by them. So it feels like that, but then in reality, it's just two dogs. Based on what the fear you might be feeling, any kind of feelings you might be fearing in a situation that might seem pretty like amped up and like what's about to happen to be kind of as that. So not my favorite example, but just to say that there are some things evolutionarily in us and in our ears that make it so even if we just have a sound source, a source on the left of us and a source on the right of us, that it might feel like we're being surrounded by it. And here's an image that I really do like. This is from the movie Your Name. And even still in this sense, right? What was so powerful about the animation of this movie? Well, it's a cartoon, it's 2D, but it was so brilliantly animated to look like it was 3D. It was taking the kind of the things evolutionarily in our eyes that help us perceive depth and in our surroundings to make it feel 3D. Why can't we do the same thing in sound? So what is space as a dimension? Well, it's creating the impression of width, height, and depth. 360 degrees, a sphere of sound all around us. When we love a mix, when we love a master, all of these things are what we feel. So common terms you'll hear in this sense, in the sense of space: simple, left, right, and center. But then also wet and dry. If you're using a reverb tool or a delay tool or whatever, you control how much echo that you are putting behind, right behind a sound that is like in front of you. So you're creating that sense of depth using wet and dry, using the amount in which you mix in that effect. You might see also mid-side processing. We'll get into that later. What tools might you use to create space? You use your pan knob, which literally moves the sound from the left to the right. You use, again, reverb, which is short for reverberation, and delay. We've got our stereo width controls to make a sound stage that feels really wide feel more narrow, or something that feels really narrow feel more wide. And then you've got these cool special effects like your chorus, your phaser, and your flanger. And we'll demonstrate those because it's hard to describe what those are. Okay, that was the 3 dimensions. Now, tools. What are all these tools? We've got all of our dynamics tools. We've got all of our EQ tools. We've got all of our imaging tools. I'm just gonna load these up so you can look at the word salad. Again, some of these might feel more familiar than others, but that's why in this next section, we're gonna get into all of it. So before we do, how are we feeling about space? Did that spatialization, imaging, did all of that feel like it made sense? Height, width, depth, left, center, right?
Yep.
Cool. All right, moving on. Time check 2, it's 6 o'clock. If folks have to go, again, no worries. These slides will be up on the screen later, or sorry, on the website later, so you can check out this section and moving on. And also, thank you so much for joining. I still have your information. I will share you on these slides and then some other goodies. It's been really cool kicking it with you. For everyone else, let's get into it. Let's get into some mixing. Okay, so here are all the tools. Again, word salad. Let's focus on, sorry, these lights keep cutting off behind me. Let's focus on these tools for this session. So in dynamics, we're going to focus on compressors and limiters. In EQ, we're going to focus on an EQ and a multi-band compressor. And in imaging, we're going to focus on pan knob, correlation meter, reverb, delay, widener, chorus, flanger. Okay, but before we do that, still your most important tools. To the left here, this is your average channel. In this case, this is on a digital audio workstation like Pro Tools. This is literally from Pro Tools. On Logic Pro, your channel looks like this. Same kind of anatomy, and then Ableton Live, same kind of thing. So let's break this down. Every channel, basically this looks so long, but every channel is working with the exact same goodies. So what are those goodies? What are the tools, the mixing tools that you have on board, on the dashboard of every single channel? Well, you got your fader, boom. You got your meter, which measures volume next to your fader, convenient, boom. You got your mute button and your solo button, which are incredibly important as you're mixing. These will probably be the tools they'll be the buttons you press the most. And then you've got your gain knobs. You got your mono button on some channels. And then you got your ears. All of these, honestly, if you didn't know any of the other dimensions, or you didn't know the specific tools, that you just went by your ear, you could still churn out Grammy Award winning mixes, working with incredible artists. You could still churn out the kind of music that you love. So I can't emphasize this enough. Listening in your ear is the most important tool in all mixing. But since we have tools at our disposal, let's get into them. And sorry, one more thing before we go into all of those tools. Has anyone seen this curve before with these letters?
Yep.
Yeah?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. So I'm just gonna make a weird sound like or ooh, ooh, ooh. So, given those kinds of sounds, let's break down what these things are. Does anyone know what the A stands for? Again, if you know the answer, this isn't a quiz. Does anyone know what the A stands for? Attack. Boom. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Right? Attack. And then what does the D stand for?
Decay.
Decay. Perfect. So, ooh, or ooh. So once it hits that peak, then it decays down to a level at which it, what does the S stand for?
Sustain.
Sustains. So, so when it holds, it's literally sustaining. And then after it's done holding, then what does it do? The R.
Release.
Release. Perfect. Attack, decay, sustain, release. ADSR, or amplitude envelope. I'm bringing this up because this is understanding the concept of ADSR, not only does it help you synthesize sounds, like say this one, where we have, I'll just do this very quickly. So we have sine wave, and I have my ADSR here. I can make the attack really long. I can make the decay really fast. Sustain down to a level like that. And then make the release really long. Or we could flip all those things. Now we got an instrument. Right? So we just made an instrument using ADSR. Same concept will come up in so many of your mixing tools. It's like not even funny, but it's kind of funny. But again, building blocks of mixing tools. So okay, let's go. Also, just so you know, or just a kind of a way to think about things too, sustain is really what we experience when we're dealing with someone and how well they sing. So you have Steve Martin here, who like isn't even holding the microphone like consistently to his face. Or you could have oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name, but she was in wow, I'm totally forgetting names of important figures, but Underground Railroad. Come on. This is so
She was
bad.
in the series for Aretha Franklin, I believe. I don't remember her name. And she played Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman, thank you. Right after Martin Luther King Day too. So yeah, she also played Harriet Tubman. And that's a singer who, again, when they sing, when they sustain, I'll go back, but you see this up and down, you know, and a person who doesn't really have consistent singing level, their sustain will be variable. But a trained singer or a good singer, their sustain will be controlled. And it's called vibrato. So anyway, ADSR in everyday life. All right, let's get into some tools. So common tools, dynamics. How can I soften all those loud peaks? That vocal is too inconsistent. I want to glue all the drums together. I want to glue the entire mix together. Okay, not a trick question. Who knows what this is? Seeing something like this.
Compressor.
Compressor. All right, cool. And then this. When that sound goes over that zero level, what is it doing? Limiter. It's limiting the sound that can go over. So you got your compressor and your limiter, AKA one is round, one is flat, what it does to sound. AKA one controls peaks in ways that are soft, the other controls them in ways that are hard. AKA one you usually use throughout the mix and the other you usually use at the end of the mix. Usually, you can use these however you want. They're your tools. So you can do whatever you want with your tools, but these are pretty much the conventions in mixing. So you got these graphs when it's disabled, when it's compressing, and when it's limiting. Also, mind you, you can make a limiter out of a compressor. It's really compression that's kind of the living, breathing technology that is behind compression and limiting. All right, let's put those in action. So here's a signal that is the input and output are pretty much the same based on what the level is doing. So if you kind of turn this 45 degrees and just look at it straight up, it'll just look like the volume is going up and kind of down and up, and it's varying like that. Okay. Now look at how high, same signal in compression, look at how high that same signal is going. This one is reaching all the way up into this quadrant. This one is barely getting into it. So the input is being compressed, or the output is being compressed based on what the input was, because of this compressor that we're using. And then limiting, we're not even letting it get into that third quadrant. So it's just flat. That's just the level that it stays at. Okay, what steps do you take in order to compress when you use it? You have a peak, you set a threshold. So at what point do I want the sound not to cross and not to be louder than that sound? And then based on that threshold, you push it down. You compress the peak of that sound. And you might use a compressor to give it a little bit of breathing room, so it still kind of moves in proportion to how variable that sound is moving, or you just limit it so it can't cross that threshold at all. Okay, great. But now this signal is quieter overall than this signal. So then what do? You raise it back up. Or you use what's called makeup gain. So you might push it up with your fader, or you might use the makeup gain, which just gives you another gain stage on the compressor, and then make it up so that best to your ear, it matches the original volume. Or you'll just use your output gain. All of these are at your disposal, but usually using makeup gain helps you manage your dynamic processing better. Okay, ADSR. So they're both the sound, whatever this is hitting this compressor is causing it to react really, really fast. But then on the way back down, what's the difference between this one and that one? Anyone? Might need to look at it a little bit. All right, I'll just go ahead. Yes, perfect. This one releases really fast. It's like, and then this one is going like, so one goes really fast, one goes really slow. The release of one is really fast, the release of one is really slow. Okay, conversely. And then this is compressing that sound like, what is this one? If the other one was released, then this one is attack. So the anatomy is generally the same for all compressors and limiters. What do I mean by that? On every compressor, you will generally have the same kinds of things offered to you. You'll have some kind of input gain to turn the input level up or down, so the signal up or down. Then you have some kind of threshold and ratio. The ratio is the intensity at which, once it crosses that threshold, it clamps the sound down, it compresses the sound. Then you have some kind of attack and release control. How fast it takes to hit to compress, and how fast it takes for the compression to back off the signal. And then you have some kind of makeup or output gain. So this is a Logic Pro compressor. It's very digital sounding. It's very precise. They call it surgical. This is another digital compressor by Waves, but same kind of thing. You have some kind of, well, this one doesn't give you an input gain, but it does give you threshold and ratio. It does give you attack and release, and it does give you some kind of makeup gain or output gain. And then you have this analog compressor. One of the classic ones, actually, Michael Jackson's Bad album was mixed a lot through this compressor. It's called an 1176. What does it give you? Some kind of input, some kind of threshold or ratio. It doesn't give you a threshold. It's arbitrary where it's set, but it does give you ratio controls. And then it gives you attack and release, and it gives you an output gain. All right, let's do just like one example because I want to mind everyone's time. What does this thing even sound like? The easiest actually is to think about drums. So let's do this. Let's just use a limiter just to save some time, or actually, sorry, okay, we'll use the Logic Pro one. So this one doesn't give me a a threshold. So I'm gonna have to match it with the output level. But if I turn this up, you can see that it's reducing the sound, right? Cutting decibels down. So everything yellow here that's crossing over 0 is pushed down that much. I'm actually gonna take that output level down quite a bit and then push it some more so you can hear the effect. And then turn it up. So again, I'm using my ear. I bypass it. You hear the original. A bit more punchy. But what if I wanted that roomy kind of, sound like this? Want it to sound bigger. Or sound more spacious. So that literally is compression. We just compress the hell out of those drums. And then at the very last stage, we used our ears to match the levels because we didn't have threshold and makeup gain controls on board. Okay, 6:14. If I didn't have technical difficulties to start, it would be a 6. We have a little bit more time, so please bear with me. But I'm gonna go through a bit more of this. That sound okay for folks? Do we need to pause? Did all of that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just
Alright.
wondering,
Sure.
is the recording available as well?
Of this video?
Mhm.
It will be, yes.
Mhm.
Cool. All right, let's go on to EQ. This one should be a lot easier. Okay, I want to take that ringing tone out. His deep voice is dominating the whole choir. The treble on that synth is grating. There's too much rumble from the mic stand. What are the kinds of tools we use to address these problems? Well, again, we take this example, the same kind of chart, graph that helps us look at the information frequency by time. So bass frequencies are here, mids are here, trebles are here. You can think about pretty much the bass area is just like, if you had like Skrillex, when he drops the bass at one of his concerts, he's basically just like playing with that part of the frequency spectrum. Or you could take this pleasant gentleman in his car with his window rolled down, but usually what does he have in his car? He has some kind of control, or maybe the old school cars did, or a lot of the old school ones, but usually you'll have some kind of control that allows you to control the lows, the mids, and the highs. A lot like this same complicated tool, but just this gives you more controls. But there's really nothing different between the 3 controls and then this one as EQs, not fundamentally. Okay, so let's take this tool that we were using earlier with the sine waves, something in between really simple and really complex. We can break this one down very similarly. We have basically 0 hertz here, start of human hearing here, 20 kilohertz, 20 hertz, and then at the end we have 20 kilohertz, and it even does some processing beyond, does some funky stuff beyond. But this is an EQ2. So on the spectrum from 20 to 20K, we have our lows, we have our mids, and we have our highs. And they're separated, these 3 areas that they're separated into, we can call those bands, just like the car EQ, 3 bands. Now, some EQs limit how many bands they let you play with, so that the system it's so that it's running less processing power, analog or digital. So that might give you more bands. But then in digital, we can get really surgical with it. We can really zoom into any one of those frequencies and play with it. So that gives us all of the bands, so the entire spectrum. Not a multi-band rainbow, but a spectral rainbow. Okay, so what are the different things you might play with on an EQ? You might play with a bell curve that basically is taking some band that you could squeeze or make wider, and then you're attenuating and you're boosting. You're turning volume at that frequency, that center frequency up, or you're turning it down. And then how you play with the width of the band is the Q factor. Okay. This is a shelf. So it's attenuating a whole band that basically extends the end of the frequency spectrum for this EQ and turning all of it up. So not just a limited band, you know, that's like on the left side and the right side there, but like from wherever that center frequency is starting all the way to the end. But again, it's just turning like the whole, it plateaus out, and then it pretty much can only go up as far as like, you know, say 12 decibels or 24 decibels, almost like gain, not your fader. If you wanted to turn the whole thing down, you would have to cut it. You have to take all of those frequencies out. So this is going from the center frequency to the end of the EQ, but then it's just cutting everything out past that point. All right, examples. What does this thing sound like? It's easy to talk about, but let's actually make some sound. So let's take another break. And then let's use that EQ. I'm gonna turn this down a little bit. Some of this should sound pretty familiar to y'all if you're DJs. Sorry, it was on the wrong one. Okay, we'll turn that down a little bit. All right, let's say the easiest ones to demonstrate are your highs and your low cuts. Let's create some of those. Let's take all of that treble information, cut it. And then you'll see, even with some of these, you'll see with even some of these high cut frequencies, we can even we can intensify that Q factor, basically a center frequency, and create almost something like a bell frequency, which then turns that specific frequency up. So it's almost like it rises up and accentuates the frequency before then it cuts all of the rest. So and that gives you a more dramatic effect. Versus just this. So you don't get that kind of sweeping effect as if you had a bell and you did the thing. Almost sounds like wind when it sweeps back and forth. And then you got your low cut. And then put all the information back. Okay, does that all make sense to folks?
Yes.
Cool. Accentuating information, boosting, accentuating, and then attenuating, emphasizing, de-emphasizing. Okay, and then also just to explain what happens when you take an EQ and you combine it with a compressor, basically separate it into bands, and then you let some of those bands compress. Well, you get a multi-band compressor. So if you've ever seen that term, very powerful tool, allows you to do some really cool stuff. And then your ears are invaluable with EQ too, and you have to basically train your ears around an EQ so you can even hear it. Okay, lastly, space. All right, I just want to give each sound its own space. The engineer treated her voice so nicely. Those strings sound so full in the mix. All the sounds fly under, above, and around me, just like this. Okay, how do we do that? Well, let's start with the simplest one. Let's start with pan, and I could do that example right now. So we had this. Got all the way to the left, only hitting the left ear. Move it to the right, only hitting the right. So that's your very first line of kind of first tool to be using. That's your pan. And then just other things to understand is that not all sounds are recorded in mono. So say you have what does that mean? Mono means that, like, you know, the sound sounds like it's coming from right in front of you. It doesn't sound like it's like spatial. It doesn't sound like there's different stuff happening between the left and the right channels that makes it sound open or three-dimensional and all of that. It sounds like it's just right in front of you. Now, when you record your vocal, that is in mono. And also, just to understand what that means on a stereo playback system, your headphones, is that basically the left ear and the right ear, the signal is hitting the exact same in both ears. And so again, it sounds like it's right in front of you. What is this meter down here to kind of indicate that? Well, that means that the waveforms are in phase. They're doing the exact same thing and they're adding up together. So they are not, there's no canceling out. It's 100% additional. So the left ear and the right, the signal going to the left and the right ear are amplifying each other because they're perfectly in phase. Now, if you have a recording and you mic it a certain way, you put microphones are always gonna, no matter what you do, there's no way to get perfect phase relationships between two microphones. It's virtually impossible. Just like in real acoustic space, like in real life, no sound is gonna be hitting the left ear and the right ear the exact same way. It's just never gonna happen. And so you're always gonna get some kind of cancellation. But when you mic it well, then you only get so much of it. So here's that correlation meter only moving so much and staying mostly positive. So that's good miking. But then you might have some different kinds of effects. You might be trying to emulate a certain kind of theater or a hall or whatever. You have certain technologies that model after these spaces called reverbs, and they add a bit more dynamism between things that are hitting the left and the right ear. And again, this happens in real space. Any room that you walk into, if it sounds echoey, you're getting this effect. There's things are hitting the left ear and the right ear at different times out of phase. And it creates that sensation that we know as reverb. So different effects are used to model after this. So you got your chorus, your flanger, and your phasers. I'll demonstrate these in a little bit. Let's take that miking example. You mic the same, but you do it bad. You do it not well. Well, you're going to get mostly cancellation between the left and the right ears. The signal going through the left ear and into the right, and those will mostly cancel each other out. You might be doing that on purpose. If so, great. But if that's not what you intended, well, this is the result, and they're mostly canceling each other out. And when I say canceling each other out, is that on a speaker system, because the speaker, like your headphones, it's not just one speaker. It's a left speaker in your left ear and a right speaker in your right ear. But it's a combination of two independent speakers. When you go into any dance party or a bar, or you're in your car or whatever, and it's got like 6 speakers, that's 6 mono speakers. So if you got sound that's canceling itself out before it can even hit any of those mono speakers, then it's not gonna feed the same. Sorry, lights just went off again. 1 second. So cancellation, again, if it's intentional and you want this in stereo, great. But if you want playback, if you want the sound to come through a mono system the same way it feels that it's coming through in a stereo system, you've got to watch for this kind of thing. So bad miking. And then what happens when you have a signal that is perfectly out of phase with another signal, you add them together. They cancel out entirely. Again, this might be what you want. In the case of noise cancellation headphones, that's actually what's happening, is that they're basically doing a counter signal against the signal that's going in, and then they're adding them together so that you get the perfect experience by the time you hit play. So no rustle, no like rumbly, chords, no jets humming outside or airplanes humming outside. It takes all the sound and phases it out, literally phases it out. Okay, the tools you might use for space. You might use a widener to amplify some of that stereo information. There's all kinds of different wideners. I won't get into all the different ones and what they do. Then you'll have your chorus, your flanger, your phaser, which they basically sound like this. That's a phaser. That's a phaser. And I just to be intuitive, just think about basically what those tools are doing to cancel out information between the left and the right ears. It's super technical, but you can hear it, you can feel it. And these are all spatial tools. You might want to use these to your advantage in your mix. Then you've got your simple delay, or you can think about that as echo. So how many times you replicate that sound and basically play multiple iterations of it. So let me turn this up a little bit. But it's not just echo, because after a certain level, it doesn't even feel like echo anymore. It just feels like space. Let me mute it. Turn it back on. But then if I raise the echo up, or the delay up, now it starts to sound like echo. Okay. Oh, sorry, my bad. So that's delay, that's echo, and then some of those things are also fundamental for what a reverb is, too. Reverb has a couple other tricks up its sleeve, but basically models space. We're thinking about space. And then, yeah, so we just did some examples. Write this number down, 35 milliseconds. Basically, this number means this is the number of the speed at which you repeat the signal in a delay before it starts to sound like echo. So here's 25. Sorry. So it doesn't feel all the way like echo yet, but like once we get into that like 40, sounds a bit more like echo, and of course we go up. So write that number down.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah, sure.
So below 35, does it start to sound more metallic?
Yes.
Okay, so it's more like a metallic reverb versus a delay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you might want a touch of that. So like I know John Mayer's engineer did that on I Don't Trust Myself with Loving You. He just added a hair of delay to the snare to make the snare feel like it was kind of like not just like pa, but like ba, 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 just to give it a little bit of drag. And then he turned it really, really softly, so it's subtle, but it kind of helped that song feel a bit more bluesy. So yeah, so 35 milliseconds, just keep that number. I also want to be sensitive to folks' time. It's 6:30. Do folks mind staying on a bit, just so I'm not talking into the void? Does anyone plan to stay on just for 10 more minutes?
Yeah, 10 more minutes works.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll get to these last pieces. We're basically at the finish line. Okay, and then your ears, of course, for a delay. Or sorry, for space. Okay, mixing. That's mixing, y'all. That's all the tools. That's compressors, that's limiters, that's EQs, multi-band compressors, reverbs, delays, chorus, flanger, phaser, all of the major tools that you will be basically needing for a mix. You did it. Like that's it. You can basically start getting into these things and combining them. Unfortunately, won't have time to run through like a mix of like using all of these tools in action. But you've got the basic ingredients, and I hope this excited you to go use them. So I'm going to give you some more word salad. Some other things you might be playing with as you get kind of more into the intermediate level of mixing. You got your saturation, distortion, expander, transient shapers, blah, 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 blah. Or you can just think of these as other variations on the same dimensions involving volume, space, pitch. We didn't get too much into pitch, but you know, pitch is a really simple. Pitch is really simple when it comes to mixing. But yeah, space, EQ, and dynamics, loudness, frequencies, and space. Where's an example space? Boom. So special kind of reverb, special kind of compressor. We got some more ADSR, got a compression technique, making volume automatic and not doing it manual. These are all just the things you would be doing in your 202 tools. Okay, great. So prepping for mastering, we're gonna blaze through this. So now that you got your drummer, you know, you got their recording, you got your bass player, you got your orchestra, and you got your pianist and your horns, and you got your lead singer, you got your track, boom. And you got your compression going on, you got your pan set, you got your EQ, and you got some special warbly cool effects going on, and you got your mix. What is the next thing you do? You look at your console, you think about your gain staging, and you might just need to turn the whole track down just a little bit. Or if everything in the individual channels are peaking, you might actually have to turn all of the channels down. Again, once you think you're done with the mix, the most important thing you can do is think about how you organized your gain and stage it just a little bit better. Why? Because you're the mixing engineer. and maybe the mastering engineer too. But you just finished the mix. Now it needs to go to the person who's going to master the track. You need headroom for that. That is the space between the highest point of the track or the channel and the point at which it starts clipping, 0 decibels, or it starts distorting. So that space, 6 decibels of headroom, 12 decibels of headroom. Usually 6 is pretty good for a mastering engineer, but you might even want to make it a little bit less if you want them to work some magic on your mix. So headroom, really important term. So this is Mike Bosey, mastering engineer who worked on To Pimp a Butterfly, also Tyler the Creator's Igor, also SZA's Control, and Janet Jackson's All For You. He's been in the game for like decades, and he's been mastering people's stuff for like a really, really long time. Mike would need a little bit of headroom if you were sending your mix to him. So what would his process look like, or any mastering engineer's process look like? Well, we won't get too much into this as I promised, but let's just define some things up front so that these terms aren't confusing. So think intuitively. I love the way that album sounds. I never have to adjust the volume knob between songs. This album sounds amazing on vinyl. The master was warmer and fuller than my original mix. So mastering engineer is basically the steward that's working on all of these things. So some kind of terms that the term comes from. If you do a research, if you do a deep dive rabbit hole into the history of mastering, you might see terms like waxing engineer, transfer engineer, tape master, or terms like remastering, like remastered jazz albums, or the new remastered Radiohead release is a good example. Let's just hold this one. And just very briefly, the mastering engineer, before they're kind of known as they are now in the industry, the mastering engineer was, let's take the 1970s. 1970s, you had a golden era of all kinds of recording technology. You had vinyl, you had cassette, you had tape, you had all kinds of play formats on which people could be playing things back. And you were starting to see the early digital, like what basically the predecessor to what we have now. So if you were an engineer who like wanted to make sure that listeners were having the same experience across all of these different playback systems, you would have to transfer the mix between all of them and make sure that it was consistent across all the systems. That's the history of this practice of mastering engineer. And then it started taking on more aesthetic forms of like, these are the people who really knew the technology really, really well. And they knew like what dynamic processing to use, what EQ to use, what spatial treatment to use, that they started becoming known as mastering engineers. And that the process kind of came from that. All of that said, you can be an incredible mixing engineer and just leave like basically 2% of the work for the mastering engineer. You could do 98% of the work and then that mastering engineer takes care of 2. Or your mix could be so good that it doesn't even really need to be mastered. And mastering engineers know really well not to touch the mix because the mix is too good. So you might have just done 99.999% of the work. And then the mastering engineer does that 0.00001. So history of that term. So the process. Let's think about film. After you shot the film, the cast, all of the different scenes, you've gone through the whole TV series, all of the entire movie, you've done everything. And you've gotten it to the editing, the editors who basically like work Photoshop, but like with film, they're using Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere and all of that. What's next? Well, you've got to have some person who knows how to get that film on the formats of, get the master tape and preserve the best possible copy of the movie, get it into the cinema, get it into the movie theaters or on Netflix or whatever, or get it on, I'm dating myself with this, but or get it on disc, Blu-ray or DVD, this is just the history of it. Things are very different in 2022, but I'm a millennial, so I just showed my age. So why not the same for music? You want a mastering engineer who's going to take that Alicia Keys album and make sure it sounds good on Spotify and on vinyl if she does a vinyl release, or to make sure it sounds good on Apple Music, Tidal, and Spotify. So we take Beyonce's Lemonade album, all of the different tracks going to the mastering engineer. This might be how they look at the mix level, but the mastering engineer's job is to take all of this variation and make it sound consistent from track to track. And sometimes mastering engineers are literally dealing with mixes that are so inconsistent like this. I think Beyonce's mixing engineer is doing pretty good job before they get it to the mastering. So what tools do they use? They use digital ones like digital compressors, digital limiters. They might use analog EQs and analog compressors. And for all of this, it is important that they have enough headroom to play with to use their tools and play with the rest of your mix to get it from the mix level to the mastering level. Gain staging, this is why gain staging is important in the very last run of it all. And all of that to say, there's really no difference that Mike Bosey did with these albums than what you did at the mix level with all of these tools. He just might have like certain kinds of tools that help him go an extra step than some of these basic things might offer. But that's the only difference. So you too could be a mastering engineer if that's what you want. Okay, so here's mastering 202 topics: analog versus digital, dithering, bit depths, oversamplings, blah, 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 word salad, word salad. What basically are all of these things? It's making a mix more loud. It's adding pleasant noise and masking unpleasant noise. It's keeping noise out of the mix. Let's take out some extra words, actually. Let's take out some more. It's making the mix more loud. It's noise that's better than other noise. Higher frequencies, preventing unpleasant noise. How loud should the mix be, the master be? What is the range between the loudest and the not loudest? So we're looking at, again, dynamics. In this case, we'll say noise for frequencies, or sorry, for space and for frequency, and then tools that listen to the mix, past the range of human hearing to help prevent some artifacts that don't sound pleasant and don't sound musical. Dynamics, EQ, and space. Those are your 3 dimensions. Mastering from the mixing level to the mastering level is all the same. We won't watch this video. So in the final moment, you might be asking yourself, should I call myself an engineer or producer? How long will it take me to get good at this? Is my mix good enough to show people? And you might even ask yourself, who am I as a musician? And I hope that these tools just help give a little bit more anchoring to your journey as you set sail into this broad sea of waves in this infinite, endless sea of music. So I hope this gave you some tools. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all. I have a few more minutes if folks want to go, no problem. But yeah, if folks have any other things. Thank you, Victoria. I'm so glad you got to join. I'm like, I can actually see people's names now. But yeah, if I have a few more moments, if folks have a few more questions or anything, otherwise, we can end here. I'll go ahead and cut the video, and then it should be uploaded to the website at some point.
When are you thinking about doing 2.2 or 202?
Now that this video is gonna be online, I feel like I can let people know, like I can tell people ahead of time, like, hey, like, watch the 101 and then just run a 202 workshop. Because the 202, if you've got all these fundamentals down, gets really, really, really fun. And that's basically putting a mix together. And like, to me, 202 starts giving you the basics to understand like everything that's happening at the mastering level. The mastering engineer level, which if you have the vocabulary at that level, it just helps so much. And I think, yeah, I think it very much is in terms of for an equity, in a kind of equity sense, because the industry has very much looked like a certain kind of demographic the entire history of it, for a lot of reasons that's a whole 303 conversation. It's like this language is just incredibly powerful to protect yourself, to keep things focused on the music, keep things focused on the sound, keep things creative, keep the sound design and production, and just like keep it fun, keep it around the music and the sound. Yeah, I'm thinking about for people who have just been historically vulnerable in positions in the music industry, like this is the kind of language that really helps, helps just give a little language is powerful. Language is powerful, and it's empowering, and folks get the cue early that like, oh, they can't talk over your head and try to control the process if you have this kind of language. So yeah, that's my little soapbox and preaching at y'all.
I wanted to, sorry.
Oh, please, please.
I wanted to ask like where like which department or like where do you teach? Like where can we get like more involved? Like if we want more practice or just like to like immerse ourselves in this a little bit more.
Absolutely. So I don't work in a department. I work in the office of the vice president for the arts. So it's the same organization that runs the Roble Arts Gym, but then also the equipment lending library, and it's connected to the different extracurricular arts things that are happening on Stanford. So Cantor, Stanford Live, kind of a lot of those services and programs on campus. If you you could always reach me by email. I'll drop it in the chat. I'm at tcbrooks@stanford.edu. If you want to reach out to me and kind of just like ask further on these things, or want to do, I'd also just like run workshops like independently of VPA, of more of my work at VPA, just because I want people to have this education. So you can always find me. I'm literally at your service, literally at your disposal. But if you're looking for departmental involvement, like curricular involvement, highly recommend the Center for Computer Research and Music and Acoustics. That'll be CCRMA or CARMA. That's the hill. That's the big mansion on the hill behind Flomo dorm. They have classes that are basic. It's more around kind of computing. So getting into some like really hard code, but they do have some offerings on just like basic sound engineering and mixing. You can probably look at some of their offerings. I believe if Jay Cadis is still over there, that he still runs his kind of entry level mixing mastering course, which is basically all this information I just shared with you, but over 10 weeks and with some exercises and some deep dives and different ways to kind of workshop music and get a lot more hands-on with the process. So, but yeah, I'm absolutely if you'd like to just get coffee and just talk mixing, mastering, sound design, and music, Victoria absolutely would be. I would love to, and if you have other friends who are also interested in this. Sorry, the lights just went out again. Would be more than willing to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do other folks have things? Are we good? Cool. All right, y'all. Well, this has been great. We are if 15 minutes of technical difficulty, not included, we're at time at 6:45. So we're just now hitting the 1 hour, 30-minute mark. It was really wonderful doing this with y'all. Hopefully, again, that didn't feel too lectury. Hopefully that felt valuable. And again, all of this will be online. So, and I'll be around. If I didn't explain it well here, then hit me up. I'll do better, over coffee or over a synthesizer. So yeah. All right, y'all. Have a great one and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
See you.
Bye. Later, y'all.